Hello. It's still echoing a little. 1 second, we're working through some technical difficulties.
Give the zero your speaker out.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's gonna.
Maybe it'll work.
That's when.
Okay,
This sound.
I can see if she can.
When she started talking.
And it should be like she's in.
You don't know, second, sir.
All right, can everyone hear me now? All right, wonderful. So sorry about those delays. So Lori and I developed a task list as part of our Evaluate project. So Evaluate is a project located here at the Evaluation Center that is funded by the National Science Foundation. And we serve as an evaluation hub for the National Science Foundation's Advanced Technological Education Program. And so as part of building evaluation capacity, we provide resources such as tools that people can use, trainings, we facilitate networking, and we also do research on evaluation and collect data. We also conduct research on evaluation and collect information on the ATE program that's used as part of evaluation of the ATE program overall. 1 second, sorry, I'm just trying to figure. Too many windows open to figure out which one to share. All right. All right. I think we're set now. So Evaluate works to try to build evaluation capacity. And as part of this, we know we have a bunch of resources right now. And in the future, we're working on developing more resources, and we want to have a comprehensive set of resources. So in order to know whether we have a comprehensive set, we need to know what the key evaluation tasks were. And, we had a good idea what they might be, but we had no way of validating it. So we set out to do a validation study of a task list to help us really internally develop our resources. So that is what we did. And the task list that we came up with, the tasks fall into 7 different task areas. And for each task area, there is a task statement that generally describes about the task area and gives indication about the type of tasks you may find. And then we came up with 43 tasks that fall among these 7 task areas. So a task is a key decision or action involved in completing quality evaluation within the ATE context. So all of the tasks have a clear beginning and end, but with that said, they may need to be revisited. For example, we have a task about creating contractual documents that includes a scope of work, and that may be something that needs to be revised if the scope of the evaluation changes at some point in time. But for the sake of avoiding redundancy, we made all the tasks have a clear beginning and end and acknowledge that they may need to be revisited. We also added a why to the tasks, which is really common in these type of tasks lists. It was also really helpful when we were developing it to make sure that we were focusing on what needs to be done and not why or how to conduct the evaluation. And then our task list pertains to both evaluators and non-evaluators. So again, just to reiterate, the task list focuses on what needs to be done in the evaluation process and why it needs to be done. It does not focus on how to conduct evaluation or who should be doing it, because the task can be completed by evaluators or non-evaluators. And it's not how, which was actually really a difficult challenge when developing it, because it was hard to list the task, but not how to do it. So that was something we found difficult in the development of it. But I think also we engaged some experts. We asked them to review the task list that we had drafted. And it was something I think they struggled with as well when giving us feedback. It's hard to talk about the what and not the how. So for all the tasks we have, they have a task statement, which again includes the what and the why. This is an example of the management task area, which includes 4 tasks focused on bringing together an evaluation team, budgeting, preparing contractual documents, and then engaging various type of external experts if needed. So the development of the task list. So we started with drafting a task list, and then we set about conducting, validating this task list through a study. So that initial task list was developed based on the evaluator competencies from the American Evaluation Association, the program evaluation standards, the AEA's guiding principles for evaluators, the Better Evaluation Rainbow Framework, and then our own experience as evaluators and working with the ATE community. So when the American Evaluation Association's competencies came out, they were hailed as this really helpful resource for framing evaluation, education, and training. And we tried to use the competencies to help inform our resource development, but we ran into a few issues, which is why we switched over to a focus on tasks versus competencies. So some of the issues we ran into are that Evaluate serves both evaluators and non-evaluators, such as grant specialists. And a lot of the competencies may focus on things that non-evaluators don't need to know. So for example, competency 1.8 talks about advocating for the field of evaluation and its value. Not something that a grant specialist would necessarily need to successfully complete their duties. The competencies are Evaluate provides brief services, usually through webinars, workshops, web chats, maybe offline through people using our resources. But it's only realistic that we could provide a limited guidance on certain topics. So it makes more sense to provide guidance on limited tasks, such as what information to include in a proposal versus, how to navigate conflict management within the span of a webinar or a resource. Tasks are also more aligned with how adult learners seek out information. So for example, there's a competency that would relate to evaluation reporting that's worded, communicates evaluation processes, results in timely, appropriate, and effective ways. So that sort of wording doesn't necessarily lend itself to being able to easily find resources on reporting. So focusing more on resources on reporting aligns much better with how people are going to be searching for different tasks when they're in the moment and trying to get those tasks done. And then competencies also focus on broader skills that aren't necessarily needed. So evaluate usually focuses on the training efforts on evaluation specific skills. So the competencies cover things like interpersonal communication, project management, and ethics that people may get training on elsewhere. And again, because we have limited interaction with individuals, we try to focus on the tasks that people need to get done to complete the evaluation successfully. So I know what you're thinking. 43 tasks, Kelly, really? Not 45, not 41? We'll come back to this question at the end after we talk about development. But it does seem like a bit of a random number. So I just wanted to acknowledge that people may be wondering about that. So the validation study involved 2 phases. The first was a task tracking study in which we asked evaluators in the ATE community and project principal investigators to record their evaluation related tasks over the course of a year. And then we also engaged in a Delphi study with experts in ATE evaluation. So the task tracking study was conducted over the course of a year. Online through Qualtrics. We had evaluators record their evaluation related tasks weekly and principal investigators record their tasks monthly. We sent out reminders, and then if people didn't submit, we would send out another reminder. I think we got 100% response rate, which was really, we were very lucky. But so through this process, we started trying to do some coding by taking the tasks that were being recorded by the PIs and evaluators and comparing that to the framework we had developed. And the tasks that were being recorded were too general for us to make accurate statements about whether all of the tasks we had generated were being conducted or not. So for example, people would say things like, I cleaned data and then I'm preparing the final report, but they didn't list the level of detail about, I conducted interpretation of the evaluation results. So we also conducted video calls in the spring of 2021, and this helped to fill in a lot of the gaps. This task tracking portion was really helpful, and we learned a lot through the process. So some examples of some changes we made to the task list include adding a task about documenting program changes. There's a lot of evaluators and also PIs include their evaluators in project meetings so that they can stay on top of what program changes are, which may be part of an evaluation, and or they may be monitoring that to figure out how to appropriately adapt evaluation activities to changing programs. We also added an item about seeking feedback on reports. So we had one about writing reports, but we didn't have an explicit one talking about getting input from decision makers and people involved in the program on the report and the interpretation process. We also added an item about ensuring the preparation needed to ensure timely access to existing data. So the ATE program stands for Advanced Technological Education, and usually these projects are implemented at 2-year universities. Often they consist of implementing degree programs or creating courses to get people interested in the field. And the outcome data often that is collected relates to course enrollment, course completion, or degree completion, things that need to be accessed through an institutional research office. So the process of getting data from that sort of office is really timely. And you can't just necessarily send an email and get a response back that's satisfactory in a week. So you need to like set it up, make sure the timeline works, figure out if they have the data you need, and then also make sure that you're on the same page with how you're defining and thinking of the variables and how they're defining and thinking of the variables. So it's an in-depth process that is somewhat specific to the ATE process or the ATE evaluation. So we added an item about that. So next is part of the Delphi study. So if you're not familiar with Delphi studies, it involves getting together experts on a field and asking them a series of questions, usually over a couple of rounds until they come up with some sort of consensus. So I participated in two different kinds. One, we looked at research products, and people came together and had to come to consensus on a rating quality. In this case, what we did is we had reviewers look at the task framework, and we had two rounds, and we revised the task framework in those rounds, and then they came to consensus on whether or not the task needed to be changed. So we engaged 9 evaluation experts in ATE evaluation. We asked them to look at all the task statements and the task area statements and let us know if the statements were fine, if they required minor revision or major revision, and then asked them to tell us what needed to be changed and why. We also asked about if there was any missing content and left some space for any other comments. Usually in that other section, we got feedback about if there was any sort of possible duplication between tasks. And so as part of a Delphi process in general, usually you reflect the information that you collect in the first round, and it helps to inform the data in the second round. So here's just like a quick screenshot to show you that for every single comment that our reviewers made, we documented it, and then we responded as to whether or not we made those revisions, and we described why we did or why we didn't, or maybe we used what they said but modified it in a slightly different way. So we explained how to respond for every single comment that all of our reviewers made between round 1 and round 2. The Delphi process, again, was very helpful. It helped us add some additional content to the introduction to do a better job of framing what the task list is and what it's not. So we have the tasks are numbered, and we added some specification about, even though they're numbered, that doesn't necessarily mean they need to be completed sequentially to have a successful evaluation. We added a little bit more clarification about the fact that the task could be completed by either evaluators or non-evaluators. And then we added a little bit more clarity about the fact that the tasks were designed with a clear beginning and end and may need to be revisited throughout the evaluation process. We also added an item about needing to get HSIRB approval or a waiver that we had not included prior. And we got some really good feedback about where there was redundancy between items, and we're able to eliminate a few items based on this feedback. And then we also made a note about in the section where in the task where we talk about contractual documents, we added a note about needing to specify data ownership based on feedback that we got during that process. Next, we asked 2 of our teammates on the Evaluate team who are leading a study on diversity, equity, inclusion to review the task list. Both Dr. Aisha Boyce and Dr. Tiffany Tubby, and they gave us some great input that led us to adding an item about needing to analyze trends and patterns using demographic data and implementation and outcome data to find out if there's any issues going on related to diversity, equity, or inclusion, maybe differences in outcomes or differences in utilization of services by different groups. We also got a little bit more specific in some places in our language. So added language about making sure the evaluation participants are from diverse groups and making sure that reporting is both accessible and is understandable. Oh. So the framework was completed in summer 2022. And coming back to the burning question, are there really 43 tasks? My answer to that is both yes and no. So if the study was completed again by a different group of individuals within the ATE context, I believe that they would come up with a number that is similar to 43. Maybe it would be 44, 45, 41, but that the same content would be covered in that process. So my final answer is that yes, there are really 43 tasks. And if you're not familiar, this little slide is a play on a t-shirt around Kalamazoo that says, yes, there really is a Kalamazoo. So how we've used this study and the deliverables that have been created from it. So Evaluate has used this work to help guide the development of our website and how resources are organized. We've conducted a gap analysis to identify the tasks where we need to develop more resources. We're also hoping to use it to orient individuals to like the full spectrum of different evaluation tasks involved in the process. You know, and just thinking about how I use things as a student, I think this is something that could be used potentially by new evaluators when they're leading an evaluation, maybe for the first time, to make sure you're doing all the steps, or when you're building a budget to make sure you're including enough time. So you're considering everything that needs to be done. Lori, did you want to talk about how the evaluation lab may be using the task list? We can't hear you, Lori.
Okay, and I'm not echoing. Okay, so yeah, this actually just occurred to me when we were kind of working through the presentation. So yeah, it's really practice focused. So again, it's, you know, the AEA competencies are really great, but, you know, better for really a firm founding in an academic background of, you know, a broad spectrum of knowledge and skills that, you know, practicing evaluators are going to need. So what's the point of our task list? As you've already pointed out, the Evaluate's using it to make sure we have resources that cover these tasks. But I also think there's potential use for it for people engaged in guiding evaluation students through field experiences and practica and things like that. And so when Kelly mentioned the evaluation lab, that's something we're starting here at the Evaluation Center. It's going to be really intentional venue for us, the Evaluation Center, to engage undergraduate and graduate students in gaining real world evaluation experience. So you know, it actually didn't occur to me till yesterday, but like, we can look at this list and it'll need some adaptation, but like, okay, what are things that, you know, people really should gain some hands-on experience in, so that they are prepared to go out in the world and be practicing evaluators. Because as we all know, like the classroom-based learning, you know, is pretty detached from, in many cases, from like the hands-on real world things. So this could be sort of a guide to like, okay, what kinds of experiences do we want students to get as they go through these sort of field-based practical experiences. I think that's all I have to say.
So the deliverables that have come out of this, we have the task list. If you're here in the room, there's a few floating around. You can access it through this QR code, and I think there is a link in the chat. We also presented a conference at the 2022 AEA conference. And if you are here in Kalamazoo, you can view that poster at the hallway at the EC. I was very proud of it. It was inspired by one of my daughter's books. So we made it a flip up poster. So you can see the task areas on the outside, and then you can flip it up and see an abbreviated version of the task underneath. We also have 2 blogs that have been published through AEA 365 and republished through Evaluate's website. So the first talks about retaining participants as part of long-term studies. The second, which is coming out this month, is an overview of the task list, just to make people aware of it. And then we also have a journal that's under review through the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation, which is an open access journal that hopefully will be published, and focuses on why we focused on tasks and lessons learned for others that may want to do similar work that are focusing on evaluation capacity strengthening. So I want to take a moment and thank everyone on our Evaluate team and that participated in the study, who helped us finalize the task list. They put a lot of time and effort and thought into the process. And so we want to make sure that we pause and really thank them for all of their contributions. So thank you so much. All right, and now we will open it up for discussions or questions.
Anybody in the room? Comments? Brad?
I have a question. So I'm curious about why on task number 1, management, I read that and those really read to me like a lot of kind of pre-evaluation activities. Almost kind of more planning than management. I mean, some of them you say, okay, we'll do this and then follow through on it later, which I think is good. But I'm wondering why you made the decision not to maybe like conceptually separate those things a little bit more.
Say conceptually separate, say again.
Planning that happens before the evaluation
Yeah.
from management that would go on kind of throughout the life of an evaluation.
Yeah, I don't know, Kelly, I can take a stab. Unless
Yeah,
you
go for it.
Probably have a better. That is a struggle, especially with management, because you can't keep saying, do management. Like management is something you have to pay attention to throughout. So the key, the way we kind of framed it was management is those key upfront decisions that you got to get in place. And then you're just like, so I think we have like an overview point in the beginning, like these are a lot of these decisions, and not just in management, have to be not only executed, but also revisited. We have a section called planning and design, and that's where it's really about planning framing the evaluation and planning the substance of the evaluation. But I think one of the, like when Kelly said, is it 43 tasks, and she also mentioned the better evaluation framework, which is a great task-based framework as well. And they have maybe 34 tasks and a different number of task areas. Where you put some of these is kind of like, you could call them something different, you could put them in different buckets, but so, yeah, once you get in, like, we had a lot of conversations about where to put things and, yeah.
Well, I think part of it comes from just even my own personal experiences with evaluations of working with folks who sometimes try to do these things after an evaluation starts, particularly like assembling a team, and sometimes even messing around with budget things, or trying to bring on experts. And it's like they're doing it too late. And just like making it clear how important it is. Really, these tasks are done before starting.
And that gets into that territory that Kelly was talking about, where we really try to not say how to do it, because that's the job of evaluation. Say, okay, here's a task. Now we're going to do a webinar or a workshop or create a resource that really provides the guidance on when and how to do this and who should be involved. Did you have a?
Well, I was going to add, I wonder if part of the structural decision is really based in the AT context, right? So within grants that are funded by the National Science Foundation's ATE program, there is certain things that need to happen pre-award. How well those things are done, right, is a question. And I also think something that's unique about this framework compared to some of the others, say like evaluator competencies, is it really is this mix between who is doing it. And who does these tasks really differs across a lot of AT projects. Sometimes they're done by the principal investigator, sometimes they're done by a project team, sometimes they're done by a grant specialist, sometimes they're done by like a college administrator, sometimes they're done by the evaluator. And so I think that this framework in the context of AT gives a lot of flexibility, both in terms of timing, pre-award and post-award, and who's actually doing those tasks.
I have a question. Did you, I know that you mentioned, one potential use of this as being like costing out, helping to guide an evaluation and potentially like where, like what costs might be associated with different aspects. Like, did you find during the study at all that people were cutting out certain tasks more than other tasks because of time and budget?
Kelly, you would know that answer better than I would.
That people were trying to cut them out. Oh, that's a good question, Val.
And that they're like, well, our budget's so small, so I have to focus more on like this kind of data collection as opposed to doing like a lot of analysis.
Well, so, like our items about data collection were pretty general, so I couldn't necessarily tell you the different types of data collection they engaged in. I mean, one thing that's coming to mind is we had an item about meta evaluation and assessing data or evaluation quality. And that was probably something that was done sort of informally. So that was something that was not done as part of the evaluations often. But I don't know that we had specific enough data to really speak to that level of detail.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Okay.
also didn't look at it by evaluation. We were looking at it across
okay,
several projects. just to
Okay.
make sure we were looking at the universe of tasks, not analyzing by. That would be something that could be done with the data, though.
yeah.
Do we have any questions from our friends online? You can come off mute or put your question in the chat.
I have another thing in the meantime. How do you think that you were able to get 100% response rate?
Well, Anna Council, who was on the team at the time, did a great job of putting out these really cute reminder emails that had like pictures of animals and such. So I think that's, we also paid participants. So I think that helped as well.
Yeah,
And
and
then
no
I think we
one,
also developed like a relationship with them, and a lot of them
Okay.
we interacted with over the years in different capacities through Evaluate. So there's also that prior relationship, I think. that-
okay. Yeah, because I could see people getting annoyed pretty quickly with weekly reminders. You know?
Yeah.
I hear 100% participation and I'm suspicious.
Now, let me though, but let me also say.
You know, 100%. No such.
So one thing that we've, I think, been more sensitive to in recent years with Evaluate is honoring people's time and also thinking about equity. So we rarely, if ever anymore, ask for volunteers. We compensate people for their contribution. Not only, Kelly publicly thanks them, so we publicly thank people, but also even if it's just, symbolic and an honorarium, like we do honor your time. Particularly with people of color, because you often want that kind of diversity. You want all kinds of diversity, but you often want people of color represented. And sometimes those people, because there might be fewer, get overburdened, and it's not fair to go back and asking the same people. I mean, we're also attentive to trying to get different perspectives and voices into our work, because Evaluate's doing a lot of different research on evaluation studies. So I think that's just something that we've tried to build in, is that compensation piece.
No, Brad, I do want to say, people could put in their entry, like I didn't do anything this week, or I was on vacation. So
cool.
we just got some sort of response from people each week. They didn't necessarily have to do anything, but we just asked for like some sort of response.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And I think probably that's something
Knew it.
fairly unique to this
Brad.
is the inclusion of the non-evaluator side. I think a lot of studies are always asking evaluators, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What do you,
Yeah.
how did you get trained? And so we were really, because of the point that Lisa raised earlier, like it's a team effort. There's these responsibilities are distributed. So we were, it was, I think not unique. I don't know if it was unique. I think important for this study to include the non-evaluator, so the project leaders, like what their responsibilities are. And I think that may be it's so important. You got to have somebody on the project side to be, caring about evaluation and making sure it's on the agendas and evaluators are getting the data and things. So that was a really important piece to include, I think. Just patting ourselves on the back for that one.
I have a general reflection question. So this is Lisa Beccio. I'm in the room and the PI of Evaluate. So I have an inside understanding of this process, and it took a while, right? I think you originally started in at least with the idea in 2020.
Oh, the original task list was probably 2015,
right?
Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question at this point, right? Yeah, years down the road after doing a lot of different things to validate it and changing it and tweaking it, how do you feel?
Well, I want to bring up to Kelly. Do you have a
No,
feeling?
go for it.
I look, because you haven't looked at this in a while. So I looked at the task list. I looked at Better Evaluations Rainbow Framework. So if you haven't seen that, you should check it out if you're interested in this. So I looked at that again. It's yeah, that's good, but ours is really good too. And I reread the paper that we just submitted to JMD. I was this is a really good paper. So I feel really good about it. I feel really proud of it. Kelly and I are, it takes a long time because we are meticulous, we are precise, every single thing, I'm sure it's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but we want to really make sure that this is really what we're putting in just a sentence or two is super clear and accurate. So it takes a while to get to that point, but I'm really proud of what we did. And I do think there are other, again, it's specifically for evaluate, but I think there are other opportunities to use it. And I hope other people will check it out. It can be inspiration to do something similar. It could be a starting point to do something similar. It could just be, again, like Kelly said, like just, oh, what all is involved in evaluation again, and kind of thinking through that. It's definitely not intended as like, here's a checklist on how to do evaluation. It's not that. How do you feel, Kelly?
No, I think I'm proud of it, and I think it will stand the test of time. I'm sure maybe at some point it'll need to be revised, but yeah, I think it's pretty strong and a good reference, and will be really helpful for evaluate.
So you mentioned that this is Michael Hartner. I'm in the room as well, and director of the interdisciplinary PhD program and evaluation here. My question is you've made it clear that this is really kind of context specific. You used ATE evaluators, ATE program managers. What would you think this needs if you wanted to make it more relevant to evaluation beyond ATE?
That is a great question. Probably doing field testing with other individuals. I feel like most of this would apply to a lot of other evaluations. The items that are coming to mind that may not would be, setting up, needing to get that institutional data ahead of time that may or may not apply depending on what's being looked at. I think there was a task about data management plans, which pertains specifically to the ATE program. But I think most of it could be applied in other contexts very easily. But if it were to be adapted, I think it definitely has to be field tested. We sort of learned that you just have to talk to a lot of people and get a lot of input to make sure you're not missing anything.
Yeah, I think the examples that Kelly gave were like probably things we would take out to be more generic rather than things we would maybe add in. I did a sort of cross comparison with Better Evaluations Framework, and they had some things in there about like extrapolating findings, which is not something is expected in the AT context. It's very project focused. It's something they have a whole domain on basically determining causation, which again is not always something that's part of these smaller evaluations. It might be, and we have a point, like basically in our task list, we have a decision point. Like if you're gonna, determine causation, I don't know what language we use, like how are you going to do that? But not necessarily that, we don't have a whole task area on that. So again, that sort of reflects our specific context. We try not to be overly specific, like you won't see a lot of references to specific, like the ATE program and NSF and everything. There might be one or two references to NSF, but we were purposefully not that specific in the language just so that people could look at it and it might resonate with them or feel applicable to them. So we try to make the task specific, tailored to ATE without somebody looking at it and go, oh, this won't be relevant to me because it's about this program. So try to strike a balance there.
Can I ask another question? So you had people enter, data every day, right? Like, what were they entering it in?
So they were entering it into Qualtrics.
Okay.
It was just open text boxes. So we didn't give them the task areas. The people that completed that portion of the study, they never saw the task list. So we were just asking them to just put in, I think it had like the date, and then it was an essay box where they could list their evaluation related tasks.
Okay. And then you would qualitatively like code that.
Yeah. So then I coded it using the task list that we had drafted. And then I tried to code the responses, and that was
Right, like every week.
I think I tried to do coding like every 3 months.
Yeah.
A handle on how things were going.
Yeah. Cause I was going to say that's so much data that like, how are you managing that?
It was, so the evaluators responded once a week and the project staff responded once a month. And it was a lot less data than I thought it would be. And again, I think because people were reporting on somewhat of a general level, like I cleaned data or, I reviewed the data that we received. And so sometimes I would ask follow-up questions. But I mean, it was a lot of data, but I guess it was a little less data than I anticipated.
Yeah.
We were it was more of a deductive coding, like we had their raw, well, Kelly did all this. So their raw data with our task lists, like as codes, but also allowing for like, is there something else?
Something to
So it
emerge,
wasn't like
yeah.
looking at it from scratch and having to figure out codes and all
Yeah.
that, which would have been a massive undertaking.
Yeah, yeah.
So Susan online had asked for a link to the blog where we talked about retention over time, participant retention. And so I put that in the blog, I'm sorry, in the chat. The link to the task list is in the chat. And yeah, I think those are the two things in the chat. Any other comments from online or in person? Melissa?
What did you find was the hardest part about the whole process?
I think the hardest part for me, was when we were doing the interviews after the task tracking process, and I didn't want to like lead people to answers. Like, I didn't want them to feel like they should be doing interpretation. So asking questions that were general enough that they would answer it in an accurate way without trying to like, have them feel a pressure to, say that they did certain things that maybe they did or did not do. So I feel like that was the most challenging part for me, is just asking those questions that felt like they were in a fair and balanced way.
And I would say for me, and Kelly alluded to this earlier, is separating defining the task of what needs to be done versus getting into like, oh, and you should do it this way, so we did struggle with that, like, and also some times it was challenging because, as Kelly mentioned, we tried to include a why you do this. It's just one sentence. So it's like, most of these tasks are one sentence, maybe two. It's like, this is what you do, and here, and have the rationale. And part of including the rationale was that we weren't just throwing things in there because we just do them. That's just what you do. And one of the times I personally struggled is, why do we do reports? Why do we write reports? Well, because you just do. But we finally came up with, like, okay, what's the real reason we write reports? And it's to have, and beyond, besides them being required, by NSF, it's to have a stable source of information about the report, because about the evaluation, because you can have probably a really fantastic and meaningful and insightful and actionable dialogue about findings. And that might be more valuable than a report. So why do we do reports? Well, so it can be, you can refer to it, you can pull it out and you can share it. It's documentation. So that was just a funny one where I at first couldn't come up with a reason about why we do them, other than you just do. That's what you do. So that sometimes that was tricky, and don't hold me to it being rationales for every single task. I think probably 95% have rationales. And I think an area where it got tricky, like Kelly talked about the DEI review, is like, okay, is that an area when we're like maybe mentioned disaggregation to look at trends by different demographic groups? Is that where are we getting into being prescriptive? And I don't think so, because especially in this context, like for NSF, that's a major value, is to have broader participation among all, demographic groups. So it isn't just like, that's not just our personal thing, like that's embedded in the program. So but those lines were tricky to navigate, and we probably didn't do it perfectly, but yeah, holding ourselves back from telling people how to do things like in this, because that's not the purpose of this. And and always trying to have a rationale. Those were the challenges for me.
I guess a follow-up question to that, trying to just keep yourself onto this, less how to do something, more just what to do. Do you feel like it impacted your work moving forward in other evaluation contexts?
I think there were some things in there. I don't know if it made it in the final task list. I think there's something about anticipating potential negative consequences for the evaluation. And I think that was inspired by one of the source documents we used, like either the guiding principles or the AEA competencies of the program evaluation standards. I can't remember. I was like, I'm not sure that I've always stopped to think about that. Like, could someone be inadvertently harmed by this? And let's avoid that harm. Or, could there be political fallout from somebody for somebody, unintentional. So I think that's something that wasn't really on my radar and it is now. So is that a major impact? I don't know, but yeah, I think there's things in there that kind of do that. Or not Kelly. Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, so we just finished this last year. I don't know that I've engaged in too many different activities, but I like that I can have it as a resource to kind of reference back as like a checklist, just to make sure I am considering everything in the future.
Can I answer that question?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I think for me, something that this task list has made me really think about the difference between data analysis and data interpretation. And what that means to teach people how to interpret data. And like, what are the actual strategies that we as evaluators use to do that?
Yeah, and that's a great example because that's something Evaluate has done a webinar on recently, right? Were the
No,
evaluation specific? Yeah, it touched on it. It
Future
touched,
imaginary.
it touched on it. So again, this for Evaluate, it's like, oh yeah, we don't have anything
Mhm.
on that area and we can do it. But yeah, when I did my little cross comparison with the Better Evaluation Rainbow Framework, they just have analysis. They didn't really, I don't think they really had a separate thing on interpretation. And where we've situated developing recommendations as an interpretive thing, because it's not like the data just don't say this, do this. It's part of interpretation. And in theirs, it was part of reporting, which I think ours is better. There's a great, it's for different contexts. It's a great resource.
I think, I just had a conversation the other day about this topic of interpretation. And I think that, like, at least one thing from working on the Evaluate project is we've been pushed a lot of being able to say, like, the so what of this. And that's where I think the interpretive piece, like, also really comes in. Like, you can run tests, you can do qualitative analysis, but then there's also like the next step of like, well, how do you actually use and make sense of this data? Like, how can this data be some sort of like guiding force? And that, in my perspective, has an interpretive lens to it, right? But that's not often taught in statistics classes, for example, or a lot of like research classes. My friend was saying she heads up a research group and she was like, I have people give me data. And then I'm like, okay, so like, how do you make sense of this? And they can't make sense of it. Right? Like, they're just like, well, and because of that, like, to me, and I was like, well, I think that's an interpretation issue, and evaluators often, perhaps this goes back to the ability to make value judgments or not, but, feel uncomfortable in that territory of being able to not like decisively, but come to some sort of explicit thing that they have to stand by, and then back up that interpretation. I'll get off the soapbox now.
We're good.
That's all? Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to register for the next cafe, which is coming on next week. We'll be joined by Mike Hannah and Kerry Rose Nelson and Alison Pale. They'll be presenting on teaching evaluation through role play. So thank you and thanks for making time for us today. Have a nice weather weekend. Bye-bye.
Nice try.
To get a picture before everyone's